faces.
February 4th, 1983. A quiet morning in Downey, California. Agnes Carpenter was in the kitchen when she heard a noise. Something was wrong. She rushed to her daughter's bedroom and found Karen collapsed on the floor, unresponsive. Panic set in as she called 911. Moments later, paramedics arrived, but it was too late. At just 32 years old, Karen Carpenter was gone. The news sent shockwaves around the world. Fans couldn't believe it. Just days before, she had seemed to be on the road to recovery. She had been smiling, talking about her future, even planning a comeback. So how did a woman with one of the most beautiful voices in music history end up dead in her parents' home? As reporters scrambled for answers, rumors spread. Some claimed it was heart failure, others whispered about drug abuse. But the truth was even more tragic. Karen Carpenter had been fighting a deadly battle in secret. The cause of death? Complications from anorexia nervosa, an eating disorder barely understood at the time. Her passing forced the world to confront a silent epidemic that had been lurking beneath the surface. Karen wasn't a star spiraling out of control. She was a beloved icon, a wholesome girl next door whose suffering had gone unnoticed. She had it all: fame, fortune, a voice that could bring tears to anyone's eyes. Yet behind closed doors, she was trapped in a cycle of self-destruction. But how did it get to this point? How did the sweet, talented girl from Connecticut go from topping the charts to wasting away before the world's eyes? This is the untold story of Karen Carpenter, the woman who sang about love and happiness but died longing for something she never found. Karen Ann Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950 in New Haven, Connecticut, the second child of Agnes and Harold Carpenter. From the moment she was born, there was an unspoken rule in the Carpenter household. Richard was the golden child. Agnes Carpenter, the family matriarch, had poured all her hopes and dreams into Karen's older brother, a musical prodigy. Karen, on the other hand, was simply expected to follow along. In 1963, the Carpenters uprooted their lives and moved to Downey, California, hoping to give Richard the best possible shot at a successful music career. Karen, just 13 at the time, was overshadowed by her brother's talents and largely ignored by her mother. She craved attention and approval, especially from Agnes, but the affection never came. Karen's initial escape was sports. She loved playing softball and even had a natural athletic ability. But music soon found its way into her life. She joined the school band at Downey High School initially as a drummer, surprising everyone with her innate sense of rhythm. It was a boy's instrument at the time, but Karen didn't care. She quickly became obsessed, spending hours perfecting her technique. But her life would change forever when she opened her mouth to sing. In 1965, Karen's natural contralto voice was discovered almost by accident. When she sang along to her brother's piano playing, Richard and his friends were stunned. Her voice was deep, rich, and hauntingly beautiful. It wasn't long before Richard realized that his sister was more than just a drummer. She was the voice that could take them to stardom. While Karen was stepping into the spotlight musically at home, things hadn't changed. Agnes still favored Richard, and no matter how much success Karen achieved, she never felt like she was enough. That deep emotional wound would follow her for the rest of her life. By the late 1960s, Karen and Richard Carpenter were on the verge of something big. After years of playing in small bands and local gigs, their breakthrough came in 1969 when they signed with A&M Records. But it wasn't an instant success. Their first album, Offering, failed to make waves, leaving them dangerously close to being dropped. Then came They Long to Be Close to You in 1970, a song that changed everything. With Richard's lush arrangements and Karen's velvety voice, the song became a massive #1 hit, launching them into the stratosphere of the music industry. Audiences were mesmerized by Karen's vocals, warm, intimate, and heartbreakingly pure. It was a voice unlike any other, a sound that could make joy feel nostalgic and sadness feel beautiful. Hit after hit followed. We've Only Just Begun, 1970. Rainy Days and Mondays, 1971. Superstar, 1971. Yesterday Once More, 1973. Top of the World, 1973. Karen wasn't just a singer, she was the soul of the Carpenters. Fans adored her and critics praised her technical control, effortless vibrato, and emotional depth. The duo sold over 150 million records worldwide, won 3 Grammy Awards, and became one of the best-selling music acts of the decade. But beneath the glossy exterior of success, cracks were forming. While Karen became the face of the group, Richard remained the dominant force behind the scenes, controlling the musical direction and decisions. A&M Records and Richard wanted a clean, wholesome image, which meant Karen had to fit into a specific mold: soft-spoken, graceful, and picture-perfect. The pressure was relentless. Even though Karen was a talented drummer, she was pushed to the front as a singer, a decision that left her feeling stripped of her identity. Drumming was her passion. It made her feel powerful, but now she was being packaged as the beautiful, fragile songbird, expected to look the part at all times. The industry demanded perfection, and Karen, already struggling with self-esteem, took it to heart. Her obsession with her weight began during TV appearances, where she saw herself looking chubby compared to Hollywood's impossibly thin standards. As the Carpenters' fame grew, so did Karen's battle with self-image. Under the spotlight of the world, she felt an immense pressure to be flawless, petite, and delicate, a pressure that would soon consume her entirely. Meanwhile, their grueling tour schedule was physically and emotionally draining. Richard, dealing with his own struggles, developed an addiction to Quaaludes, adding more tension behind the scenes. The duo's relationship, once built on love and mutual ambition, began to fracture under the weight of fame, pressure, and personal demons. Karen Carpenter had become a global superstar, adored by millions. But with each standing ovation, each platinum record, and each magazine cover, she was slipping further into an invisible war with herself, one that no amount of fame could silence. By the mid-1970s, Karen Carpenter was one of the most recognizable voices in the world. The Carpenters had become a household name, selling millions of records and filling concert halls worldwide. But behind the polished performances and beaming smiles, Karen was fighting a losing battle against an industry that demanded perfection, not just in her music, but in her appearance, behavior, and identity. At just 5 feet 4 inches, Karen was naturally petite, but she became obsessed with looking thinner. The music industry had always been brutal to women, but in the image-driven era of the 1970s, the expectations were relentless. The entertainment world was filled with stick-thin models, glamorous actresses, and impossibly perfect stars. And Karen, a girl who had once been happy behind a drum set, felt the weight of unrealistic beauty standards crushing her. A&M Records and the people around her subtly reinforced the pressure. Comments about her weight, sometimes disguised as compliments, sometimes as offhanded remarks, began to chip away at her self-esteem. Television appearances, magazine shoots, and public expectations forced Karen into a mold that never quite fit. She was told to be soft-spoken, graceful, and delicate, reinforcing the idea that her value was tied to how she looked, not just how she sang. Even her own family, though loving, failed to recognize the warning signs. Her mother, Agnes Carpenter, had always been controlling and emotionally distant, prioritizing the Carpenters' success over Karen's personal happiness. Karen grew up feeling like she had to earn approval, and the music industry only amplified that pressure. She had spent her entire career trying to be what everyone wanted, what A&M wanted, what Richard wanted, what audiences wanted, but no one seemed to ask what Karen wanted. As Karen's image became more scrutinized, her weight loss spiraled out of control. By 1975, she'd begun experimenting with extreme dieting, cutting back her food intake drastically. She told people she was just watching her weight, but in reality, she was slipping into the depths of anorexia nervosa, a disorder that was barely understood at the time. By 1976, fans and the press began to notice her transformation. Her once healthy frame became alarmingly thin, her face hollowed out, and her arms shockingly frail. But instead of concern, she received praise. Magazines complimented her elegant look, and people around her told her she looked fantastic. Encouraged by the validation, Karen pushed further, using laxatives, excessive exercise, and extreme calorie restriction to maintain an unhealthy weight. Her obsession with control extended beyond her diet. She hated confrontation, often going along with Richard's decisions, even when they went against her wishes. She was the star, yet she had little say in her own career. Every album, every performance, every tour was decided by someone else. The one thing she could control was her body. As the pressure mounted, her health declined. She became weaker, exhausted, and frequently ill. Concerts became a struggle. She would lose her breath easily, feel dizzy on stage, and sometimes collapse from sheer exhaustion. But she refused to stop. The Carpenters were a machine, and Karen felt like she had no choice but to keep going. Despite her obvious deterioration, no one in the industry intervened. The 1970s music business was ruthless. Profit mattered more than well-being. Managers, producers, and executives focused on keeping the hits coming. Karen's suffering was invisible to them, or worse, ignored because she was still able to perform. Even when Karen sought help, doctors dismissed her condition. Anorexia nervosa was barely recognized in medical circles at the time, and many professionals assumed she was simply dieting too aggressively. One doctor prescribed her thyroid medication to speed up her metabolism, making things even worse. Another advised her to drink more water, failing to grasp the severity of what was happening. Karen was trapped in an industry that had rewarded her self-destruction. The more she shrank, the more applause she received. The thinner she got, the more the cameras adored her. It was a cycle that no one around her seemed willing or able to break. By the late 1970s, Karen Carpenter was still America's sweetheart, but behind the radiant smile and angelic voice, she was wasting away 1 pound at a time. By the late 1970s, Karen Carpenter was fighting two battles, one with the relentless pressures of fame and the other with her own body. What had started as an attempt to maintain a slimmer figure had spiraled into a full-blown obsession. At a time when eating disorders were barely understood, Karen hid her struggles in plain sight, deceiving those closest to her and, for a while, even herself. At first, no one took her weight loss seriously. She was a pop star in an era obsessed with glamour and thinness. Losing weight was expected, even praised. But as the years passed, Karen's condition worsened dramatically. She no longer simply dieted, she was engaging in self-destructive behaviors that took over every aspect of her life. By 1977, Karen's body was in a state of constant starvation. She had reduced her caloric intake to dangerous levels, surviving on nothing but lettuce leaves, iced tea, and occasional bits of fruit. Even when her ribs jutted out and her arms became frighteningly thin, she refused to see the problem. Family, friends, and industry insiders began to notice. Richard Carpenter, her brother and closest collaborator, was consumed by his own struggles with prescription drug addiction, leaving Karen largely to battle alone. Her parents, Agnes and Harold, were in denial, convinced that Karen's weight loss was a simple phase rather than a life-threatening disorder. Even as fans gasped at her frail frame during live performances, the music industry remained silent. No record label executives, managers, or producers intervened. As long as she could still sing, no one was willing to step in. By 1979, Karen's condition could no longer be ignored. She weighed less than 90 pounds, her skin pale and stretched tightly over her bones. She suffered from dizziness, exhaustion, and frequent blackouts. Concerts were cut short, studio sessions became a challenge, and her once pristine voice began to weaken. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Karen began seeing a therapist. But psychological treatment in the 1970s was ill-equipped to handle eating disorders. The doctor suggested that Karen's strict upbringing and pressure to be the perfect daughter contributed to her need for control. Though insightful, these sessions failed to stop her deterioration. Then came 1979's tour of Europe, a turning point in her decline. British tabloids mercilessly fixated on her appearance, publishing headlines like "Karen Carpenter, Too Thin to Live." She was deeply humiliated but still refused help. When asked about her health, she laughed it off, assuring reporters that she was fine. She wasn't. By 1981, the situation had become dire. Friends like Olivia Newton-John and Dionne Warwick tried to gently encourage her to eat, but Karen dismissed their concerns. She claimed she had it under control, even as she continued to lose weight. That same year, she was hospitalized for exhaustion. Doctors warned her that her heart was weakening, that she was on the verge of organ failure, but she still refused to acknowledge the severity of her condition. Her desperate search for a solution led her to extreme measures. She turned to a nutritionist in New York who prescribed massive doses of laxatives and thyroid medication, making her condition worse instead of better. By then, her body was consuming itself. Her muscles wasted away, her bones became brittle, and her once angelic voice grew weaker by the day. In 1982, after years of denial, Karen finally admitted she needed help. She entered a treatment program in Los Angeles where doctors forced her to regain weight through intravenous feeding. She gained a small amount back, and for the first time in years, people were hopeful. But Karen hated the feeling of losing control over her body. She felt bloated and depressed, believing she was getting fat. The progress she made was short-lived. By the end of the year, Karen weighed just 78 pounds. Her body was beyond repair, her heart irreversibly weakened from years of malnutrition. The damage had been done. In early 1983, Karen returned to her parents' home in Downey, California. Though she told people she was feeling better, the truth was far darker. Her body had nothing left to give. The battle was nearly over, and Karen was losing. For most of her life, Karen Carpenter had been yearning for love. She had fame, wealth, and adoring fans, but behind closed doors, she was desperately lonely. While Richard had his own struggles with addiction, he still had companionship, but Karen found herself perpetually alone. She longed for a fairy tale romance, a devoted husband, and the stability of family life, things that fame had never given her. By the early 1980s, Karen was still searching. She had dated several men in the past, including actor Steve Martin and record executive Terry Ellis, but none of them had led to the love she desired. Many of her relationships were one-sided, with Karen giving her heart fully while the men she chose remained emotionally distant. But then came Thomas James Burris, the man who would change everything. In 1980, Karen met Tom Burris, a real estate developer nearly 10 years older than her. He was charming, attentive, and promised her the world. To Karen, who had spent years feeling unappreciated, Tom seemed like the answer to her prayers. He showered her with affection, told her he wanted a family, and painted a future of love and stability. For the first time in her life, Karen felt like she had found the one. They rushed into an engagement, and despite warnings from those closest to her, she ignored the red flags. Friends and family didn't trust him, but Karen, desperate for love, was blinded by the dream of a perfect marriage. She spent lavishly on the wedding, convinced that her new life was about to begin. On August 31st, 1980, Karen and Tom were married in a lavish ceremony at the Beverly Hills Hotel. To the public, it seemed like a fairy tale. Karen Carpenter, America's sweetheart, had finally found happiness. But behind the scenes, the marriage was already crumbling. Karen soon discovered that Tom Burris was not who he claimed to be. He had lied about his wealth, portraying himself as a successful businessman, when in reality he was financially unstable and drowning in debt. He began spending Karen's money recklessly, depleting her accounts without remorse. Worse, Tom didn't share Karen's dream of a family. She had always longed to have children, but he revealed after the wedding that he had undergone a vasectomy, something he never disclosed before their marriage. It was a crushing betrayal, leaving Karen devastated and trapped in a relationship that was built on lies and deception. As the months passed, Tom's behavior grew increasingly cruel. He humiliated Karen, called her names, and emotionally manipulated her fragile self-esteem. At a time when she was already battling anorexia and industry pressure, the toxicity of her marriage only made things worse. She tried to make it work, hoping that love could fix what was broken. But Tom showed no remorse. He continued to drain her finances and treated her with cold indifference. Karen, once a radiant and hopeful young woman, became a shadow of herself. Her friends could see the pain in her eyes, but she refused to walk away until she had no choice. By late 1981, Karen had had enough. The emotional abuse, the betrayal, the lies, she couldn't take it anymore. She filed for divorce, determined to break free from the toxic marriage that had nearly destroyed her. But the damage had already been done. Karen's health was deteriorating rapidly, and the stress of the failed marriage only accelerated her decline. The love she had longed for had turned into a nightmare, and she was left more broken than ever. Her heart had been shattered, not just emotionally, but physically. By late 1982, Karen Carpenter was a shell of her former self. Her once glowing complexion had faded, her body was shockingly frail, and her energy was nearly gone. At 32 years old, she weighed less than 80 pounds. The years of battling anorexia, the pressure of the music industry, and the emotional devastation of her failed marriage had pushed her to the brink. Yet, despite her declining health, Karen refused to give up. She still dreamed of a comeback, of reclaiming her life and career. In the final months of her life, she made one last effort to heal. In September 1982, Karen checked into New York's Lenox Hill Hospital to undergo an experimental treatment for anorexia nervosa. Unlike past hospital stays, this one was focused on reversing the damage caused by years of self-starvation. Doctors placed her on intravenous feeding, rapidly restoring her weight. She gained 30 pounds in just a few weeks, a drastic change that shocked her system. On the surface, she appeared to be improving. She smiled more, talked about new music projects, and even reconnected with friends and family. But inside, her body was struggling to cope. The years of starvation had weakened her heart, and the sudden weight gain put severe stress on her system. By November, she returned to California and moved back in with her parents. She was optimistic, but fragile. Her mother, Agnes, kept a close watch on her, and Richard hoped she would regain the strength to return to music. But behind closed doors, Karen was still fighting for her life. On the morning of February 4th, 1983, Karen Carpenter woke up in her childhood home in Downey, California. She had plans to finalize her divorce papers that day. It was supposed to mark a new beginning, a chance to move forward. But fate had other plans. Sometime between 8:30 and 9 a.m., Karen collapsed in her bedroom. Her mother, hearing the sound, rushed in to find her unresponsive on the floor. Paramedics were called, and she was rushed to Downey Community Hospital. For 20 minutes, doctors fought to revive her, but it was too late. At 9:51 a.m., Karen Carpenter was pronounced dead. The autopsy report revealed the cause: cardiac arrest due to complications from anorexia nervosa. Her heart had simply given out, unable to recover from the years of malnutrition and the stress of sudden weight gain. She had been so close to recovery, yet time had run out. The music industry, her fans, and the world were devastated. Karen Carpenter, the voice of a generation, was gone at just 32 years old. The news of Karen Carpenter's death on February 4th, 1983, sent shockwaves through the world. Fans, friends, and fellow musicians struggled to comprehend how one of the most beloved voices of the 1970s had been silenced so suddenly. The initial report stated that Karen had collapsed in her parents' home in Downey, California. Paramedics had found her unresponsive, and despite attempts to resuscitate her at the hospital, she was pronounced dead at 9:51 a.m. The world mourned the loss of a woman who had defined an era with her music, but the real tragedy lay in the silent battle that had consumed her life. The autopsy confirmed the devastating reality. Karen Carpenter had died from heart failure caused by anorexia nervosa. Her years of self-starvation, combined with the extreme stress placed on her body from sudden weight gain during treatment, had fatally weakened her heart. The official cause of death was listed as emetine cardiotoxicity, a condition caused by ipecac syrup abuse, a substance often used to induce vomiting. This revelation was chilling. It suggested that Karen, despite her efforts to recover, had still been trapped in the grips of her eating disorder. Her heart had been pushed beyond its limit. Karen's death at just 32 years old was not just a loss for the music industry, it was a wake-up call. At a time when eating disorders were barely understood, her passing exposed the deadly consequences of an illness that had remained largely hidden from the public eye. For those who had known and loved her, the pain was immeasurable. Her brother Richard was devastated, blaming himself for not recognizing the full severity of her illness. Fans around the world mourned the loss of an icon, a voice that had brought comfort and beauty to millions. Karen Carpenter's tragic death was more than just an ending. It was a warning. It revealed the dark side of fame, the silent suffering behind the glamour, and the fatal cost of an industry that demanded perfection at any price. Karen Carpenter's legacy extends far beyond her tragic death. Decades after her passing, her voice remains one of the most recognizable and cherished sounds in music history. The Carpenters' songs, from Close to You to We've Only Just Begun, continue to resonate with generations, standing as timeless classics that evoke nostalgia and deep emotion. Her contralto vocals, often described as angelic and hauntingly pure, set a standard in the music industry that few have matched. Music critics, producers, and fellow artists continue to praise the unmatched warmth and depth of her voice. In the years following her passing, the Carpenters' albums experienced a resurgence in popularity, with millions of copies sold worldwide. In 1996, a star was dedicated to Karen and Richard Carpenter on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, cementing their status as musical legends. Her influence stretched across genres, inspiring countless artists, including Adele, Madonna, and Sheryl Crow, all of whom have credited Karen as an inspiration. Beyond music, Karen's battle with anorexia nervosa brought public awareness to eating disorders at a time when they were widely misunderstood. Her death sparked critical conversations about the pressures of fame, body image issues, and the dangers of extreme dieting. Her family later established the Karen A. Carpenter Memorial Foundation, which has since contributed to research and education on eating disorders. Karen Carpenter's legacy is bittersweet, a voice of unparalleled beauty, silenced too soon by an industry and illness that demanded impossible perfection. Yet, through her music, she remains immortal. Every time her songs play, her voice reaches across time, reminding the world of what was lost and ensuring she will never be forgotten. If you love uncovering the untold stories behind the biggest names in entertainment, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more shocking celebrity revelations, only on our channel.